What's up guys, Patrick here at Combat Athlete Physio, and today we're going to break down a $46 million injury. On November 29th of 2018, Jack Greener was rolling with his instructor and suffered from an injury that paralyzed him from the neck down. And I just want to say one thing before we start. If you're easily squeamish at neck injuries, please view with discretion. Okay, so here's the footage of the injury. We'll watch it and then break it down after. So as many of you have probably seen before, the instructor tries to do this old Leo Vieira back take, rolls over top, and watch, you can see Jack's head snap out right there. God, man, and he just lays there. That gives me the heebie-jeebies, man. I had it actually hits close to home because I had a neck injury whenever I was younger in high school, and I fractured my C4 vertebrae. Very thankful that nothing happened. But enough about me, let's get into what happened to Jack. So we're going to follow Jack's story and explain the anatomy behind why these events occurred after the injury. Jack's injury was a traumatic dislocation of the cervical spine at vertebral levels C4 and C5. Now this makes a lot of sense because we know that a good amount of vertebral side bending and flexion is made possible by the mid and lower cervical regions, given the shape of their facet joints. And if we go back and pause the injury, we can see that Jack's cervical spine is forced into flexion and well beyond normal ranges of cervical side bending. This forced side bending and flexion, along with the compressive force or an axial load of the instructor down onto his neck, is what caused the fractures and the vertebral shifts at the levels C4 and C5. This shift began to put pressure on the spinal cord, preventing him from moving. So they immediately hospitalized him and put him into cervical traction in order to take some pressure off the spinal cord.
Guys, I cracked 2 vertebrae. I have a severed artery on my left side in the back of my neck. Pretty fucked up right now.
As we heard Jack say, along with his dislocation, he also sustained a vertebral artery dissection, which is an artery that runs through the transverse foramen, or these holes here are located on the side of the vertebrae, and they come all the way up to C1, also known as the atlas. Now, notice how the artery twists and turns after it leaves C1. It's easy to imagine that during excessive side bending, this artery would endure a lot of traction. So the biomechanics definitely make sense. And when this artery has a lot of issues, it can have a ton of downstream effects, which is exactly what happened next.
I started screaming he was gonna die, ran into the room, checked on him, knew he was having a stroke.
My nurse at the time, Justin, happened to just be across the hall.
Went through a full neuro examination as I always would. Saw that he wasn't moving. He wasn't responding, he wasn't opening his eyes.
So they go on to say that Jack had several blood clots in the vertebral artery, which required immediate surgery to remove. The American Stroke Association has a really good graphic showing ischemic strokes. You can see how the clot forms in the artery, then a small portion of that clot can break away and travel up to the brain, impeding blood from going to the tissue. Now, since nerve tissue is extremely sensitive, it only takes a few seconds to see the signs that the nurse saw in the hospital. The vertebral artery supplies the upper part of the spinal cord, the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the posterior portion of the brain. Now, we're not going to go into the specifics of what those regions and structures do for the body, but just know that this is why he was no longer able to talk, swallow, or perform basic tasks. Fortunately, the surgeries were successful. Unfortunately, the nerve cells in the central nervous system, which include the brain and the spinal cord, don't regenerate. However, the feeling that Jack is about to explain is what's known as neuroplasticity, which ultimately is a way that the nervous system can reorganize itself after injury.
For about 3 nights prior, I had been telling my nurse at the time, I was like, hey, for whatever reason, I think my left big toe is moving. Other
uninjured areas of the brain can begin to function for the damaged portions. And this happens at a much better rate in people under 40, which Jack had to his advantage. Now that the clots were removed, they had to perform surgery to alleviate the pressure off the spinal cord from his initial injury. The way that they do this is through an anterior cervical discectomy and fusion. Simply put, they go through the front of the spine and they remove the damaged disc from between the affected levels, in this case C4 and C5. Then they insert an implement to take the disc's place and reinforce the vertebrae above and below with plates and screws to secure them in place and promote the bone to fuse. After this, Jack began a really long journey of rehab to regain function, and he went on to do some really amazing things. If you want to check out all of Jack's story, I'll link the video in the description below. Albeit a really incredible journey, I hope it's one that nobody else has to endure. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be safe while you're rolling, and I'll see you next time.